What's up, everyone? So today we're going to be talking about the different ways to make a stencil. Now, you could either do it by hand, with a pen or with a stencil machine. So there's going to be a couple things you need in order to do and kind of walk through this with me today. So the couple things you're going to need are going to be, first of all, stencil paper. Now, there's a ton of different kinds out there. I recommend Spirit stencil paper. This is what the box is going to look like. There are some on Amazon, but they are not going to be the same as this type. I've tried a couple off Amazon and they just do not work as well as the actual Spirit, so I definitely recommend going with that. The other thing you're going to need besides your stencil paper is going to be a pen. Now, if you are doing hand stencils, one thing you need to think about is the different line weights of your tattoo. Like on this design, if there's a couple different line weights to it, thicker and thinner lines, you're going to want to have a thicker pen and a thinner pen. This one is a 1.4. So it's super thick. I like to use this for my lines that are, something I'm going to be using like an 11 round liner or 14 round liner. And then I'll go with, a smaller size for all my fine lines that I'm using, like a 5 round liner or a 7 round liner. So these are things that you're going to need to get. You're going to need your designs. This is going to be something that you need in order to do this as well. You could either draw out your designs, print out your designs. But with this, if you're going to do the stencil machine method, you are going to need to print out your designs. That is really the only way to create a good stencil with these machines. So this is what I'm going to break down. I'm going to go into the different ways that you could do this and the best way that I have found to create good stencils. So the first thing we're going to explain is what the stencil paper looks like, what it consists of when you look at it, and what all the different layers do. So this is the stencil paper. This first layer is what you'll be making the stencil on. This is the middle paper. It just protects the ink from getting exposed to the other sides. Some people call this onion paper. There's a couple different terms for it, but this is pretty much pointless. So I just put this to the side. Now this is your actual stencil paper. This is what is going to ink onto the actual paper or this layer so that it makes the stencil. And then the last layer right here will be your back layer. This is also for protection, just so this doesn't get crinkled up when it is in the box. So now that we know and have a breakdown of what it actually consists of, we'll get into making stencils. So the first design, I picked this one just because it has a couple different line weights to it. And what we're going to do is run this one through the actual stencil machine so I could break down how that works. This is one off Amazon. Anyone that gets these off Amazon could clearly just watch this video and learn how to do it. You could also do this design by hand stenciling, but like I said, the different line weights, you just want to make sure you have different pencil sizes or different pen sizes for the actual design. Okay, so now that we are on the stencil machine, I'm going to break down how you use it, what some of the parts are. So this part flips up, and this is where you put the actual stencil paper in. It'll go through this back part right here, come up through, and you'll have the paper right here, and it'll lock down right like that. This front part is where your actual design goes into, and you want to make sure that you are putting it this way into it. If you do it this way, it's not going to print out anything, so make sure that is one thing that you're doing. There's a couple settings on here. So the mirror one is if you want to flip this design, mirror will be turned off. So the mirror kind of helps out when you are printing it off. If that is on, it's going to print the exact same thing. If that's turned on, if it's going to be backwards. The darkness, deepness setting, obviously, you could go 1 or 2. The second one's super dark, so I try to stick with 1. And obviously, copy is how you start it. Stop is the stop button for the machine. And this is one thing you kind of want to pay attention for, because I've messed this up a ton of times whenever I was first starting out with these machines. And just trying to get used to how they actually work can be super frustrating. So this is the important part. You pop this open right here. And this yellow paper will go in the back. So if you put it in the machine like this, and it comes up through this part, and you see this part in front, it is backwards. I've done this multiple times and it hasn't worked out. So when you slide it through this back part right here, I'll fold this down so we can see. You slide this part through, and you can see it on the bottom. You pull this up through, and then it locks down on itself right here. One thing you want to do is make sure that this is all straight so it doesn't get all backed up in the machine. So yeah, you want to make sure that this part is on the top and the back, and then you just click down on this. So this is ready to go. It has to look exactly like this. So you can clearly see the blue. Everything's good to go. One thing I like to do is hold on to this. So when I put the stencil in, the design, making sure we put it backwards, and then the machine will suck it in just a little bit, like right there. And then when we hit copy, what we're going to do is kind of help this back part up. Sometimes it'll get jammed in the machine, so you want to make sure you're just, you know, not pulling on it, but just keeping pressure up. And then just hitting the copy button, it runs through. So I'm not pulling on this top one at all. I'm just kind of helping it lift up so it doesn't get bunched up in the actual machine. Okay, now we can hit stop since our stencil went through. Unclick these parts. So now we can clearly see that the stencil is on this front part. So when we pick this up away from the carbon, there will be our stencil. And this is what we're going to use for the actual tattoo stencil, this part right here. And I'm gonna show you what I like to do as well with this. So we'll cut it out, and there we go. There's your stencil. Now you could use stencil stuff, put this on the skin, let it dry, and it'll be ready to tattoo. Now on stencil stuff, you could use a couple different brands. There's Stencil Stuff, the actual brand. There's Anchored by Nico, and also Green Glide. There's a couple different methods I use for something like this with very thin paper. This kind right here, I'll use Stencil Stuff or Anchored. I use Green Glide for the method I'm about to show you right now. Okay, so after we're done running that through the stencil machine, all this carbon is still good. If you don't do a big design, you know, you could still use this. Just make sure you're not going over the same part. Now, some people will keep this on and tape your design down and trace over it, kind of like this. So they'll tape this stuff together, trace over it, and then your design will be on this paper. Depending on the type of tattoo I'm doing, sometimes I'll like to use this. Sometimes I'll actually like to use the printer paper if I want a thicker paper to kind of hold up to be able to put the stencil on. Okay, so now that we have our design ready to go, it's printed out. Now you could draw on this paper and make the stencil from that as well. I'm going to show you this way. So we have our stencil paper down. You know, the carbon is facing up. You can see our design that we just did right there. So what we're going to do is place it down on there. Sometimes if I'm doing a big design, I'll wear gloves just because when this stuff gets on you, it'll stay on for, you know, a couple days. It's not getting off. So you want to make sure you're being very careful with this stuff because it'll stain everything you have. You'll find it everywhere if you get it on you. So yeah, that's another reason why I like to use the full sheet. I don't cut it out until I'm done with the stencil for that reason, just so I don't get it on my hands, because you'll see there'll be blue stuff over your hand right here and it's like impossible to get off. The only thing you can really do is use stencil stuff, stencil remover, and alcohol and try your best, but it's still going to be there. Awesome, so we'll get into it. So with this design, we're going to press over all the lines and just pretty much trace everything going on, and it's going to turn up on the other side of this paper. So when you're doing this, you want to try to stick with one motion. I've seen a couple people like scratch it in, but you kind of want to be as fluent as possible so it makes a crisp and clean stencil. I'll speed it up a little bit so you can see what I'm doing, but we could skip to what happens at the end. So right here, you know, I'm just going at a steady pace, tracing over all of the lines. One thing that really helps is whenever you are making these, when you print them off or drawing them, print them off a little bit lighter, change the opacity so that you could clearly see where your pen is going. Awesome, so we did that line right there. And you could clearly see that it's showing up on the opposite side. Cool, so we're gonna speed this up a little bit and go through it. Okay, so now that we went over everything, what we're going to do is check on the back to make sure we did everything. One thing that really helps is if you hold it up to the light, like hold it straight up and look through, you'll clearly be able to tell what areas are done or not. If you didn't lighten the opacity or if you drew it with Sharpie or something like that, all you gotta do is hold it up to the light and you can clearly see through this side. You'd be able to see all the little lines on the background that you could just go over and make sure that you have done. So we'll cut this out real quick. And there is our stencil. And as you can see, our stencil paper is still good. You still have plenty of room for your other designs down here. This is the method that I would use if you were working on fake skin. The thicker paper kind of holds up better. It goes onto the fake skin a little bit easier. And I also use this on actual clients as well. If you're doing like a realistic design to where you're just printing off a piece of paper with like a picture on it or something like that, you could just go over and make your little dots and everything on the actual design with your pen over top of the actual picture. And it makes it a really easy way to make a stencil from an actual, you know, photography picture or a portrait or something like that, which is super cool. Now, whenever I do make stencils like this, I like to use green gold because the paper is a little bit thicker. Green gold is a thicker stencil stuff, so that it just holds up way better. It also takes a little bit longer to dry, so that's one thing you think about Whenever you are using that, I take about 15 minutes to make sure that it is completely dry with these. So these are the two different ways that you can make stencil, with a stencil machine and hand stenciling. You can clearly see that with a machine, it is, exact. It's perfect. All you have to do is follow this stencil and everything's, 100%. With hand doing them, you have to be a little bit more careful, making sure you are precise, following all your lines exactly, so you don't, accidentally mess up a line, and then when you go to tattoo it, you are messing it up. So when you are first starting out, I recommend doing it this way, just because if you're drawing this tattoo, you have practice drawing it. You also have practice stenciling it, so you're going over all the lines 2 times at this point. So by the time you get to the tattoo, you're doing it 3 times already. It just makes it a whole lot easier for you whenever you are first starting out. But if you do have the means to have a stencil printer, obviously it is a really quick and easy way to make a stencil. It saves a lot of time. And, if you have multiple clients, it saves a lot of headache as well. So I hope this video was able to help you out, gain some knowledge on how to use a stencil printer or a stencil machine, and also how to hand stencil your designs if just that's where you're at in your career at this point. If this is your first video or you like content like this, the best thing you can do is like and subscribe down below. And you could also hit the bell so you can get notifications whenever a new video comes out. Thank you. You have a good day.